friends, my name is Gary and this is my channel Weakest of Weeks. If you're a first time viewer, I appreciate you clicking on the video and definitely consider subscribing. I have a ton of how-to stuff out there and especially SAAB related videos. Now today's adventure does have to deal with another SAAB adventure. Now I will be installing these parts on one of my 0893 Arrows. This one is my project car, and embarrassingly enough, while it is well sorted, I unfortunately pretty much just use it as storage. So what I'm about to show you has been sitting in the car for a little while, just kind of out of sight, but it's going to be going on the red car. So without further ado, let me show you what I have, and it's something that I've been waiting for a very long time. Oh, please hold. Look at that. This is a custom 3-inch stainless downpipe, and I have a matching mid-pipe to go with it just off camera, and I'll show you here in a second. But I am so excited that I finally have this custom downpipe to install, and as soon as I get this exhaust installed, well, it is then tune time. So this car is gonna be totally 100% stock suspension, stock tune, whereas the red car that's getting this exhaust, it's been a couple months leading up to this point, and then once this is installed, we can go with a tune, and I'm just absolutely excited. So I'll quit rambling and let me show you the other pipe that's gonna be going on this red car and how to install them. Here's that exhaust up close so you can see how much of a form of art this is. Thinking back, I probably shouldn't have put my mouth on the end of this exhaust pipe because of everything going on in the world, but you know, well, childish things. So this is a 3-inch downpipe and matching 3-inch mid-pipe. I believe it's made out of stainless. I honestly don't know a whole lot about metal. However, it appears to be stainless and it's extremely lightweight. No, this did not come from Krona. I don't believe Krona is still making SAAB exhaust. This is not some mass-produced genuine SAAB system. This is a custom downpipe and custom mid-pipe from my friend Ronaldo and the boys at Prolific Builds. If you're not sure who they are or what they do, they are shaking up the SAAB world with big custom turbo kits and exhausts like you see before your eyes. Use the link in the description, hit them up on Instagram, show them some love, give them some likes and a follow, and check out the big things that they're doing. And they even have a YouTube channel showing the results of all their work. So going to the downpipe, again 3-inch, you have this very durable and sturdy flange that'll bolt up beautifully to the turbo. You have the appropriate O2 spots. Keen eyes will notice a certain restrictive item missing from the center of this downpipe, making this exhaust very high flow. Going to the end, you have a V-band. Going to the mid-pipe, you have a mating V-band along with the appropriate V-band clamp. That same 3-inch by design. Flex joint just like the factory. Exhaust hangers in the factory location. And then going down, you have a reducer going from 3-inch to 2.5 outside diameter. So that makes this perfect for bolting up to a factory catback. Point of mention is my red Arrow that this exhaust is going on actually has an aftermarket catback system. However, it is the factory size, so this will bolt up perfectly fine. If you're wondering about this little black box, this is something that is absolutely essential when it comes to running such a high flow downpipe. This is what's called a defouler, J style specifically, just because of the design of it. This came from a company called VMS, Vibrant, I believe makes these as well, but numerous other companies make the exact same style. You have 3 spacers. You'll pick one of the 3. We'll likely go with the smallest one. You have a snap ring along with a copper crush washer. When the time comes, I'll show you the specific installation, but literally you just place this like that, cinch it down, and that'll go in the downstream O2 sensor location. The original O2 sensor will screw into here. And what that does is it gets that O2 sensor up and out of the way of the direct airflow, because now this is a non-restrictive system. So without this little guy right here, you will most certainly kick a check engine light. Worst case, you can actually have your tuner tune that check engine light out, but in my opinion, it's best to get this little guy off eBay or Amazon, and it's a cheap insurance policy, so you're not reliant on the tuner for getting rid of that check engine light. So now that you know what pipes are going to be going on my car, and how much of a work of art this is. If you want to get your hand on a set like this, use the link in the description, but please do not waste their time. This is not some run-of-the-mill exhaust that is pulled from some shelf. It is 100% handcrafted, an absolute work of art, so it is going to cost more than, say, the genuine SAAB system. Sometimes you gotta pay to play. You get the absolute best of the best, and you're supporting somebody that's making a difference in the SAAB community. It's a little while later, and I ended up getting the downpipe ceramic coated inside and out. I even had them ceramic coat this little adapter. Even though it's going to be relatively hidden, it's going to be a nice peace of mind knowing that it will match these beautiful ceramic coated DO88 charge pipes that I've purchased used from a subscriber. We'll start by doing the easiest thing first, and that's taking off this cover for the battery. Normally there would be two little plastic pins here that you just twist off with, I believe, a Phillips screwdriver, but because mine is long gone, it just simply lifts up. Now we'll go ahead and remove this battery. There's a hole down here, the two 10mm bolts to remove these terminal tops, and then there's various things, including the battery tray, we need to remove. The thing is, I recently did a very detailed video on the turbo install and upgrade on this car. So when doing that, I ended up taking all this stuff off. So I'm just gonna breeze through this section real quick. If you wanna see exactly all the things that are required to remove this stuff, go ahead, check out that turbo install video. Caught up with that heat shield out, it exposes all the bolts and also this oxygen sensor. So we're going to go ahead and spray this stuff with penetrating oil. We're going to do the same underneath the car. Probably a lot better methods to do this, but I'm going to use a little turkey baster, like injection needle kind of thing like this. And we'll just do this until this tank is as empty as physically possible. Alright, I decided to use my little brake vacuum pump. It's just the little turkey baster is not able to get deep enough in here, and then also this has a little collection cup, so it makes it that much easier to use. Using that little brake fluid extractor pump, I think we were able to remove as much antifreeze out of this overflow tank as physically possible. So we'll go ahead and undo these top hoses. And if you have trouble getting these off, I highly recommend using a little pick tool. Grabbed a couple shop towels just in case, because more than likely I'm still going to make a mess. So we'll tip this overflow tank upwards and try to get it out of the bracket. And then that exposes a pigtail that we need to remove down here. So I ended up taking a piece of scrap hose I had laying around my garage, probably around like 3/8 size, and you can actually take one of these totally off and loop it around here because these will leak coolant out. On the bottom, we have one more hose we need to remove, and more than likely once we undo that, well, more coolant will leak out. So just be prepared for that. Here's the part where I tell you a very valuable lesson. Pull the hose downward and not the overflow tank upwards. Otherwise, you can potentially make a heck of a mess like you see here. Man, that thing came out with vengeance. So I was able to break free this upstream oxygen sensor with a 10-inch crescent wrench. Just got it on here and then turned it counterclockwise, so that is good and loose. The one that has me concerned is the downstream sensor, and this one is very tricky to get to, and you can kind of see it right there. But fortunately, the connector is right here, so all we have to do, push in on this tab right up here, and then pull it off like such. So a downstream sensor is disconnected from the car, upstream is not, but it should be disconnected from the pipe here in a second. But now we're going to go ahead and break free these turbo flange bolts. If you're wondering how I'm getting this backside one that's actually pretty darn tricky to get to, well, it's a combination of a flexible ratcheting 13mm wrench as well as a 3/8 drive ratchet extension, a little union, which is just that bendy guy, and then of course the 13mm socket. And I'm just kind of going slow, trying to get this backside one out. Some progress has been made. I was actually able to break free the downstream oxygen sensor way down in there, and you probably can't even see it in there. But pretty much what I ended up doing was using the big old 10-inch crescent wrench, got it down in there just perfectly fine, pushed it probably about a ½ an inch towards the firewall, and that was enough to break it free. And then I switched over to this little guy. I don't even know what size this is. I was able to get down in there and move it multiple turns to break it free. And then because this one we're able to disconnect, it actually lifts right out like such. Now we're underneath the car and it's time to take off some bracketry. This is the intermediate shaft. Now if you had a cross-wheel drive, this is where the transfer case would be. If it has this transfer case, the downpipe is a different shape and size. What we have to do is remove these two little 13mm bolts going to the oil pan. I have a 14mm on the end, and we'll try to break this thing loose. Oh my gosh. Ooh, that was one rusty bolt. Surprisingly, it came out in one piece. And really, the only thing we're gaining by doing this is getting this awkward bracket out that goes over top this intermediate shaft to make this easier to remove. And now that I see the second one, there's no way I'm going to be able to get this out because of the shaft right there. So I think we're kind of stuck with that. All right, so these are kind of deceptive. They're actually also 13 mils. Wow. All right, one of them came off. That one definitely broke. Nope. Second one broke. Now we're at the point where we're ready to get this mid-pipe released from the resonator. Now yours may be different because this is an aftermarket catback, so I don't know what the previous owner did. This is definitely an aftermarket deal. The factory one, I don't know if it just has a regular clamp or what it has. So this has two 17mm bolts. legitimately, my camera for whatever reason freaking stopped recording whenever I was pulling this out when I finally started to get it out. But in case you're wondering what wrestling a wet noodle is like, well, it's definitely got to be something similar to this. I mean, what a pain in the butt. And I ended up spraying some penetrating oil on the seam going into the resonator, let it sit for a little bit, and then eventually was able to wiggle it off. Had some assistance from a rubber mallet. Quick comparison to this beautiful one right here. Look at that, big difference. Nice V-band clamp versus this 3-bolt flange. And then the flex joint right here is pretty well blown out. So this was practically due for replacement anyways. So I'm gonna go ahead and wrestle this downpipe. There's only 2 more bolts to remove on this flange. O2 sensor is gone, and then this needs loosened. And then what I'm going to do is try to wiggle this out. I think the proper way to do it is actually to undo these trans bolts, lower the transmission a little bit to finagle it out. I'll try to get it out without doing anything, and then worst case I'll cut this thing out because this thing is done. I'm never going to reuse it, so I might as well cut it up for scrap. Another 13mm bolt, and I believe the final one, and then this exhaust will be fully loosened up. Wanted to try to speed up the process here. Busted out the ratchet, can get a little more leverage. The bolt's a little rusty and crusty, so it's fighting me a little bit. After messing with this downpipe, trying to get it out for a few minutes, yes, I did have this bolt taken out. I just put it back in for what's about to happen next. So this is going to be one of the few occasions where I'm actually going to destroy the part that I plan to take out. Again, I'm actually going to be scrapping this. It will never go back on the car. If you really wanted to go about this and keep the factory downpipe, well, I believe you actually have to lower the transmission a little bit to give you some space, and then as you lift this, kind of twist it up and out. I don't think it will go down that way. Maybe if you actually lift the engine up, but even then I think it's still going to be too close to the firewall where this engine hoist point is. There's just not a lot of room there. So what I ended up doing was putting this mount bolt back in here. I'm going to try to surgically make a cut right along this line, remove this top section upwards, and the rest should be able to drop down. So I have my trusty Sawzall here, got my safety glasses, some gloves. Here we have the J-style spark plug defouler. We have the little washer. We have a snap ring, 3 different adapters, and then the original downstream O2 sensor, the oxygen sensor. So this is very simple. So what we're going to be doing here is taking the smallest one, and this is the portion that screws into the downpipe. So it should have the nut on it, or it's the threaded portion. Simply just drop this inside like such. And then you have the snap ring. Now I do have a fancy, rather expensive snap ring plier set. However, it doesn't have anything that's this small to compress the snap ring. So because it's so small, we should be able to just kind of possibly use some screwdrivers. All right, that is in. Now you take the little washer, place it on the bottom. Now we're ready to screw this in. These two will save just in case, but more than likely we will not need it. And then the oxygen sensor simply just screws in here. And then before we fully screw that in, we'll go ahead and put some Permatex anti-seize on here. That way it makes it that much easier if we ever have to change out or remove this O2 sensor. With the downpipe now in, I'm going to use some of this ultra red high temp RTV or Permatex gasket maker, and we're going to put a small bead around this lip, and then we'll go ahead, put the downpipe in place, and then put in the 3 13mm bolts. Before we crank these down fully, we're gonna leave some space in here, let the gasket maker do its job, tack up a little bit, and then after about 10 minutes or so, then we'll go ahead and crank these down solid. Downstream oxygen sensor is ready to go. As long as it's parallel to the pipe, meaning it would be like this or like this, we'd be okay. You don't want it off to the side like that. And take a little bit of a different approach and actually take out the downstream oxygen sensor, then put in the J-shaped adapter. Now we're on to putting the O2 sensor back in place. The downstream sensor in place, it's now time to route the upstream sensor. So we're back underneath the car. Downpipe is where it needs to go, and we're about to install the midpipe. But a couple things I wanted to mention. One, for me, I ended up replacing these rubber isolators. There's 2 of them right here that secure the midpipe. If you're wondering as far as part number, right there, 35119. I'll link it in the description, but that's what I used, 2 of those. And then also this heat shield was rattling pretty bad. So that was broke, as well as this. Not the stud, just the actual heat shield wore away. So what I ended up doing was replacing the little nut and put a washer, and nice and secure now. So now I'm ready for the midpipe. old school clamp right here. We'll cinch it down with the two 14mm bolts. Oh yeah, that is good and tight. I'll probably go back and lob these off with the cutoff wheel. That way they're not sticking out so much. If you're wondering how I'm going to reattach the heat shield that should exist here, well, unfortunately, there's only going to be one bolt here, and then there's two other bolts, if I remember correctly, that hold it on the back side. Well, without the factory exhaust here, you don't have those mounting positions. You still have this tab, but nothing to connect to it. So let me show you what I ended up doing. I took one of the original brackets that came off from underneath the car that mount the mid-pipe and the downpipe at that joint right underneath there. I took one of those brackets, I cut it up, and then I bent it into this kind of monstrosity. It looks rather terrible. The bottom side actually looks really good. I just sprayed it with some high temp paint, but unfortunately, for whatever reason, 24 hours later, some of it's still not dry. So the top side is kind of tacky, but it's kind of whatever. It's gonna be hidden, so I'm not too worried about it. So I ended up bending it into this position here, and then I put a riv nut in the top. So it's actually going to utilize the factory bolt. Gonna sit something like that, and then that'll hold the back side of the shield pretty perfectly, actually. A fancy little bracket, got the original 13mm head bolt that was in this bracket. Go ahead, toss this in. Stud on the side. 10mm nut started on this end. 10mm nut on the top. Before we cinch these down, I need to put the new bolt into this new bracket on the back. And then you can very easily use the same exact hardware if you use a M6 rib nut like I did. And I'm using a 10mm adjustable ratcheting wrench. I love how OEM this looks even with the aftermarket downpipe in. Just adding the original heat shield makes it look so much more OEM and obviously adds protection for the overflow tank since these cars are so notorious for cooking that. Okay, we have this bottom end which needs to get connected to this guy right here. And we also need to reattach the sensor down here. Before we connect these hoses, cannot forget about the 10mm bolt that fastens this coolant hose. For the keen-eyed viewers, you'd note how these spots are now black. Well, why I ended up doing that was because it started to show some signs of wear and it started to rust. So I ended up putting some Pour 15 paint over rust paint. That should protect it for many years to come. Apparently, the battery tray has chafed through to the actual metal of the car, which started to rust. So I just wanted to protect it. Fortunately, it's a hidden spot, so it doesn't matter what color it is, but I figured if anybody were to see that, well, that's why I painted it. So now we're good to put the battery tray in and move on to the battery. Three T40 Torx bolts ready to go back in. And can't forget about the little hood, open sensor. Tighten down the battery hold down with a 13 millimeter. Tighten down the terminals with the 10 mil. Cover back on. Really, the last two steps is going to be putting on the engine cover and then topping off with fresh new engine coolant. And if you're wondering what I'm using, just some regular pre-mixed 50/50 Fram GM Dex Cool, the orange stuff. So revving it, and especially via video, it does not do this car justice. The exhaust sounds tremendously better. It is undoubtedly louder from a dig, meaning from a stop to going, but then on the highway it is abnormally quiet. So I don't know if it's because it is so high flowing or because I had issues with the previous mid-pipe where it joins to the downpipe, if it was leaking there. Probably my favorite part is when I downshift and I'm coming to a stop, the crackles in the exhaust. Oh, it's so good. And I do understand that whenever I revved it, it probably sounds a little funny as the RPMs drop down because it's starting to bog out because I desperately need a tune, and that is next up on the list. And the thing is, if you're just cruising around, normal RPMs, car is pretty quiet, especially in the cabin. Maybe not so much on the outside, but definitely quiet in the cabin. Oh, that sounds so awesome. Way better than I would have ever imagined. So if this video helped you out, be sure to give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop a comment down below. And again, a giant shout out to the boys at Prolific Builds for making this possible. This is by far the best of the best when it comes to custom SAAB exhaust and turbo components. So definitely show them some love. That being said, I appreciate you watching, and I'll catch you friends next time.